Hey Rainier View, my name is Jeff. I'm part of the teaching team here, and we're excited to jump into our series, Committed. Now, when I was in my early college years, if you've got a group of guys that you're friends with, inevitably at some point in time, no matter how musically unskilled you are, your friends will have the idea, we should make a band, right? We should all learn to play an instrument and make a band. And so I had a well-intentioned friend get me a bass guitar, and after a couple of months of looking at sheets and trying to figure out how to play this thing and butchering Only in Dreams by Weezer, I decided that this was not going to be something for me. Now, what I want you to do right now is go ahead and turn to a neighbor and share with somebody else next to you what's something that you tried to do and you gave up on, realized it is not for you. Take about 45 seconds to do that now. And so it begs the question, right? How do we know something is something that we should stick with? How do we know the things that are really going to be important or life-giving that we should really run with? And so I'm here at the library, and you can come to the library still, and there's books and books and books. Before the internet, you had to go to a place where there's physical things here, and you could learn about all sorts of different things in our world, all sorts of different skills. The internet came along, and we have the ability to learn how to do almost anything and more. Right? But it begs the question, out of all the things you could learn, out of all the things that you can focus on, what are the things that you should focus on? Because here's the thing, in our modern lives, we can do anything, but we cannot do everything. In our modern lives, we fight against the distractions that are vying for our times and to figure out what are we truly going to invest our lives in. Because focusing on too many things really ends up making us feel like we've never really accomplished anything at all. In fact, you cannot be committed to everything with the same level of energy and dedication and focus. In fact, the level of commitment of your life to a handful of things is what will determine the trajectory of your life. Trying to be committed to everything really leaves you committed to nothing. And so a commitment to a handful of key practices will determine whether or not you have this sense that you've lived a life well lived. And that's what we want for you at Rainier View. And the same is true really of any organization or group, that the more focused we are as a group, as an organization, the further those results are going to go. The more diffuse, the more things that crowd in, the more we try and do, really the less momentum and the less results we tend to see. And so we as a church cannot do everything, but we want to be laser focused on what's going to help us accomplish the mission of the church, which is to make disciples, followers of Jesus. And so by making disciples, by discipleship, we mean, again, engaging the unchurched people in our lives, inviting them to join us and helping them discover what it means to follow in the way of Jesus and to mature in that faith. That's what discipleship is and what it's all about. It's helping people discover, hey, what did Jesus do and teach? How did he think? How did he interact with other people? How did he view others and treat them? And then we, to the best of our abilities, go and do the same today in our modern context. That's really at the heart of what discipleship is all about. That's what spiritual maturity is. And so at Rainier View, we've landed on these 6 core commitments to help flesh out what is it going to look like to take steps in our discipleship? What's it going to look like to accomplish the Great Commission with some clarity and focus? And so we want to start by looking at this first of 6 kind of core commitments, and it's to engage the spiritually curious as well as equip the spiritually maturing to reach other people. That's key. Key to spiritual maturity is that if we're maturing in our faith, at some level we are helping other people be introduced to the good news of Jesus, take steps towards that, and grow in faith themselves. That's a key marker of spiritual maturity. And so each week in the series, we're going to look at the book of Acts, and we're going to look at a different passage that speaks to each of these core commitments, because we're really about returning to the commitments that we see in the early church. We want to be committed to those things as well. And so open up with me in the book of Acts chapter 17. We're going to be there this morning. And so what does it look like as we're doing kind of a one-year refresh of our All In initiative? That's what this committed series is all about. It's really kind of like a halftime. We're huddling up. We're saying, okay, how are we going to be committed to the things that we said we want to step into in this all-in campaign and initiative? And so we want to finish the second year of this commitment well as invite those of you who are new to understand what is this all about and find your role, your lane to be part of what we want to be committed to as a church here at Rainier View. And so this morning we're going to start with that commitment of how do we both engage the spiritually curious as well as equip the spiritually maturing, okay? And that's a big task, right? Oh my gosh, how do we begin? Where do we even start? How do we go about that? And so let me give you a very clear, simple way to begin engaging the spiritually curious, and it's this. We need to remember that every single person has something they are curious about that we can build a bridge to the gospel from. Every single person has something they're curious about that we can build a bridge to the gospel from, okay? And so, again, like I said, we're going to be in Acts 17, and look with me as we jump into this. We encounter Paul in Athens, okay, in the first century AD. And so Paul in Athens, it's a very pluralistic society. There's all these different thoughts and things going on there. And Paul's going around and he's setting up churches all over the ancient Near East. He's going from city to city, place to place, establishing churches, by which we mean gatherings of followers of Jesus. Sometimes we refer to these as Paul's missionary journeys, but I prefer to just describe what he's actually doing, establishing churches. And so look with me in Acts 17, beginning in verse 16. We read, while Paul was still waiting for them in Athens, he was greatly distressed to see that the city was full of idols. Now, before we go any further, look with me at where to begin here to understand what's going on in Acts 17. Paul starts with his own heart, right? It says Paul is distressed to see the people worshiping all these different idols. Are our hearts, if we're followers of Jesus, similarly distressed for the people in our world, in our cities, in our lives that are living apart from the power and new life available in Jesus? Paul was, we read here in verse 16, distressed. Do we feel that same ache inside of us? It's not about us doing the soul winning, the conversion, and the focus on like as if we can do the job of convincing somebody, because the Bible's clear. We're called to just be witnesses. It's God himself who does the conversion. But are we willing to go? Are we willing to speak and step up and share when we have the opportunity to do so? This is what this commitment really is all about. And how Paul speaks is instructive to how we go about building a bridge from those who are unchurched in our lives. And so I'm going to continue to read Acts 17, picking back up in verse 17. So he reasoned in the synagogue with both Jews and God-fearing Greeks, as well as in the marketplace day by day with those who happened to be there. A group of Epicurean and Stoic philosophers began to debate with him. Some of them asked, "What is this babbler trying to say?" Others remarked, "He seems to be advocating foreign gods." They said this because Paul was preaching the good news about Jesus and the resurrection. Then they took him and brought him to a meeting of the Areopagus, where they said to him, "May we know what this new teaching is that you're presenting? You're bringing some strange ideas to our ears, and we would like to know what they mean." All the Athenians and the foreigners who lived there spent their time doing nothing but talking about and listening to the latest ideas. And so Paul goes to the Agora in Athens. Now, the Agora at that time in Athens was like the cultural, economic hub of the city. It's where everyone would have gone. It was the place to be. It's where actually Socrates, before him, walked the streets and engaged people in conversation as a means of engaging people in learning. And in fact, we have a term for that in teaching today. It's called the Socratic seminar. It stems from this dialogue, asking questions, being in conversation around ideas. And so when Paul comes to share the good news of Jesus in the city of Athens, right, he uses the methods of Socrates in Socrates' city, that thing that he had been inherited in that city for many years before. Paul uses that methodology because what worked in a pluralistic society in Athens in the first century is the same thing that will work for us in a pluralistic society here today in our context, because we see Paul talking to two very different groups of people here. First, he says he was talking with the Epicureans. Now, the Epicureans were the people, if we kind of, in our modern era, would say they're trying to live the good life. They try to avoid pain and discomfort as much as possible and enjoy all of the pleasures that life had to be. Not necessarily a wildly hedonistic thing, but just soaking up the good things in life. And shocker, it was only the rich elites who could enjoy that kind of life. So, not much has changed in a couple thousand years, right? The other group that Paul is speaking to here are the Stoics. Now, there were a very few kind of card-carrying, capital S, Stoics. That group was rather small, but their ideas had this outsized influence in the culture around them. They held to a very deterministic view of the world, that things were kind of set the way they were, and so you really should focus on duty and honor and character and living as much in harmony with the natural world around you rather than fighting against it, and so you better learn how to be self-sufficient. Maybe just think kind of like Ron Swanson on Parks and Rec, okay? Now, again, as I said, there weren't necessarily large numbers of card-carrying Stoics, but these ideas had an outsized impact on their culture, and many people would have kind of bought into those ideas. And so Paul goes where the discussion is happening in Athenian society. He doesn't say, hey, come to me, come to the thing I'm doing. He goes to where people are and engages them in what they're curious about, okay? And so he starts there by building common ground, by finding a bridge to build to the good news. And that begins with him finding common ground, and that's where it starts with us. Let's continue to look at the example of how Paul does this, picking back up in Acts 17. It says, Paul then stood up in the meeting of the Areopagus and said, people of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious. For as I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship, I even found an altar with this inscription, to an unknown God. So you are ignorant of the very thing you worship, and this is what I am going to proclaim to you. Now, remember, Paul was distressed about the Athenians living apart from the knowledge of Jesus in their life, apart from this new life in freedom and forgiveness of sins that they could be living out of, that welled up within him. It's what drove him to do what he did. But notice that he doesn't criticize nor condemn the Athenians. Instead, he finds a way to build common ground. He says, hey, look, you've got this altar to an unknown God. By saying that, or actually back up and you look, it says, I see in every way you're very religious, right? Paul, in essence, he's saying, hey, look, I'm religious too. Look at this thing that we share together. Then he pivots and he says, hey, you've got this altar to an unknown God. And so I'm gonna tell you about this. Now, what is this altar to an unknown God? In Athenian culture at the time, it was very in vogue to worship lots of different gods. And they put it out there in case there was a god maybe that wasn't being worshipped. You didn't want them to feel left out, because if they felt left out, they might get mad at you and bad stuff could happen. So they kind of throw this out it's like a religious insurance policy. Like, hey, we're going to cover all the bases so we just don't get in trouble with anyone. And Paul goes on, in essence, to say, hey, let me share more about this thing that you're curious about, that you don't know. Let me speak to that. And so let's pick back up in the passage. Verse 24, the God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth, and does not live in temples built by human hands. And he is not served by human hands as if he needed anything. Rather, he himself gives everyone life and breath and everything else. From one man he made all the nations, that they should inhabit the whole earth, and he marked out their appointed times in history and the boundaries of their land. God did this so that they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from any one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being. As some of your own poets have said, we are his offspring. And so once again, we see the way that Paul continues to build a bridge from the gospel to other people's world is to find common ground in the things that they are interested in and curious about. And so he quotes their very own poets to them in this conversation that he's having with them. And so to build a bridge from the good news of Jesus to the world of somebody else, again, we start with what are they curious about, rather than saying, hey, you've got to adopt my preferences. You've got to speak my language. You've got to understand my insider church culture, and then all this will make sense to you. No, 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 that's not what we see Paul doing, nor is that what we should be doing in our context as well. And so how do you do this? Well, we encourage you to find something that your friends, your coworkers, your classmates, your neighbors are curious about, and starting in their world. When I had my undergrad, when I was doing my undergrad in downtown Chicago, I worked catering there for a few years. And so it was such a great job because I got to come across people from all different walks of life, so many different people. And I had a coworker, and the coworker, he was really into Marilyn Manson. Okay? He came with the, all black leather and the dog collar and the whole 9 yards, right? And so he was really into it. If you don't know who Marilyn Manson was, he was kind of a dark, sadistic musical performer, but he had these biblical references and allusions in a lot of his songs. And so my coworker was asking me about the Tetragrammaton. Now, I'm in Bible college at the time, and I'm like, is that some sort of transformer? Like, what in the world are you talking about? So I went back, did my homework. What he was referring to, the Tetragrammaton, refers to the 4 letters in Hebrew that make up the sacred name of God, Yahweh. Okay? And so he had a curiosity about this, and so I engaged him about that, and I was able to share my faith with a coworker, not saying, hey, don't talk to me about that dark stuff. Not, hey, let me tell you about my world. No, starting with what he was interested in, having multiple conversations allowed me to be able to share more deeply about the good news of Jesus with him in his life, okay? And so, again, music is a great place to begin building a bridge. If you don't know where to start, everyone's got a favorite song, favorite artist, right? And typically artists speak to universal themes, things that we care about. So start with what people are interested in. Music's a great place to start. But everybody has something that they can build, that we can build a bridge to their world to, for the sake of sharing the good news. Let's continue to see how Paul does this in Athens. Verse 29, therefore, since we are God's offspring, we should not think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image made by human design and skill. No, in the past God overlooked such ignorance, but now he commands all people everywhere to repent. For he has set a day when he will judge the world with justice by the man he has appointed. And he has given proof of this to everyone by raising him from the dead. When they heard about the resurrection of the dead, some of them sneered, but others said, we want to hear you again on this subject. At that, Paul left the council. Some of the people became followers of Paul and believed. Among them was Dionysius, a member of the Areopagus, and also a woman named Damaris, and a number of others. Now, notice what Paul does and does not do here in this passage. He doesn't build a bridge that's about him. He doesn't start by sharing, let me tell you about my Orthodox Jewish credentials. He doesn't even reference what would have been the Bible for him at that time, what we would call the Old Testament, then the Jewish scriptures. He doesn't start there. No, he starts in the world of the Athenians and what is going to connect with them. And here's the thing, the longer you are a Christian, the more prone you are to thinking like an insider and less about focusing on the needs and the questions and the things that your neighbors are focusing on and want to talk about. And so here's an example. Okay, let me give you a real life. Almost all of you probably have had this happen. It's a Saturday morning. It's nice, warm, sunny out. You want to have all the windows open. You might want to have your door open, but there's some people with little name badges walking around your neighborhood, and they're going, knocking on your door. Now, you close up the door real quick and pretend not to be home, even though those Mormon missionaries know that you are, and you just, kind of hide out for the 5 minutes until the all clear, right? Now, let me just share what I do instead. So when they come up to my door, I greet them. If it's bad weather, I invite them in. If it's a nice day, I go out with my cute little dog on the porch and we talk. And so I offer them a bottle of water. Hey, do you want a bottle of water? Do you want anything to drink, sports drink or anything? And then I start with their world. I say, hey, I'm a pastor, and I was a youth pastor for a number of years. I know that you don't have to go on mission. I would love to know what led you to choose to go on mission, right? And I'm fascinated as we engage in conversation about their choice, their decision to pursue this. And then after they share, I just bring it back around and say, hey, guys, really encourage you, just focus on the gospel, the good news of Jesus, and say, hey, can I pray for you? Right? And they always say yes. And so I just pray for that to become true to them, that the good news of Jesus would become real and what they would anchor their lives in. And then they go on their way. Right? Now that's not a ongoing relationship type of thing, right? That's more of a one-off encounter in interaction. But the same principle applies there. I'm asking about them, I'm caring about their world, and I'm actually getting drawn in. And it leads to such a better conversation and dialogue with each other. And so, again, we can all find ways to build bridges with anyone. It just starts with thinking about what do they care about, what's going on in their world, rather than making it about our rights, our language, our thing. And so, again, when we learn to do that, now here's the thing, some people are still going to reject. You look at that passage we just read in Acts 17, right? Some sneered at Paul, like, what's this nonsense you're talking about? But we see others leaning in. It's not about us winning somebody over in a single conversation. It's about planting a seed, and sometimes that is not going to bear fruit for a long, long time, maybe decades, but as we're faithful, we're building a bridge one step at a time for others to discuss and explore what faith in Jesus and following him might look like in their life. And we never know how that might bear fruit later on. And so to recap a little bit what we read here in Acts 17, Paul finds himself in an incredibly pluralistic society and culture in Athens at the time. But he doesn't choose to offend by making it about him, but he chooses to build common ground and build a bridge to the gospel that way. And so I think Paul gives us the blueprint for both engaging the spiritually curious as well as equipping the spiritually maturing. Because sometimes in church, we make it like you pick one. I'm a person who really is about evangelism and reaching people. Or I'm a person who's really about deep discipleship and really growing deeper and understanding my faith. And sometimes it can kind of be these two separate realms almost. It's an incredibly unhealthy way to think about this. Instead, we should view it as a spectrum where it starts with engaging spiritually curious people, and we build a bridge over time to equip spiritually maturing individuals. It's not two separate realms, it's part of the same process. But that process always will begin with us stepping into the curiosity and building common ground with others. That's where that process starts. We can never lose sight of it. It's why we want to be committed to this practice and this commitment as a church and focus on it intently. And so let me close with one story of how your generosity here at Rainier View is actually fueling this kind of kingdom impact halfway around the world. I want to read a story from a couple that we support, David and Melissa, one of our supported global partners here at RVCC, and the work that they're doing halfway around the world to translate the Bible in a language that doesn't have it translated yet. They're dedicating a couple decades of their life to this work and giving that up freely, but they share a story in one of their recent email updates. There's just a beautiful picture of what we were looking at in the life of Paul, this commitment to engage the spiritually curious. And so I want to read from one of their recent updates, Not Normal White People. They write, "We moved to the mountains. On our second day here, we were headed out to find the local chief to discuss renting a house. After asking around, we finally found the chief at a local community structure, waiting for the other chiefs to arrive from around the region for an important meeting. We figured there was no time for our housing meeting, but since none of the other chiefs had yet arrived, we would stay and chat for as long as we could. After an hour, it was clear something had come up and that no one was coming. So the chief invited us back to his house for coffee and lunch. We spent the next 4 hours talking with the chief and getting to know his family as we dipped homemade bread into camel stew his wife made and sipped on strong, sweet, ginger-infused coffee. Finally, 5 hours in, the conversation about our housing needs came up. The housing talk itself only took about 20 minutes and was extremely fruitful, but altogether, we had stayed with the chief for 6 hours. At the end of the visit, the chief told us, "You are not like normal white people. Normal white people would have never stayed with us for 6 hours." He was very pleased and honored by such a long visit. He arranged and hosted the meetings we needed to sign a lease and a building contract over the next 2 days. Since that first long visit with the chief, we have had many more. Now when David shows up at his house, he is greeted as a son. The chief boasts to other visitors, he has many, that David is his firstborn. We feel blessed by this good relationship. Now this spring, someone tried to cause trouble for our team. An important elder of the community saw us as an opportunity for cash and tried to force our hand to hire him. He met us many times demanding employment. We let him know respectfully that the whole team is currently in the language learning phase and we have no work, in the way he wanted work, to give. This went on for some time. When he saw it was not working, he decided to try and force our hand. He reached out to the chief, and he reached out to the county commissioner, and he reached out to every local government leader he could find, even seeking an audience with the governor to force us to employ him. However, all these leaders knew us and had a relationship with us, and all of them shut down his effort to force our hand. From there, he changed tactics and sought to spread rumors and destroy our reputation in the community. Again, the chief, the commissioner, and all the local leaders shut down these rumors and protected our team. While it was not a fun season having to deal with this mess, it was incredibly encouraging to see our community rally around us and protect us from harm. Investing in relationships takes a lot of time. It makes the long, slow work of Bible translation even slower. However, the hours put into relationship are never wasted, and without strong relationships with the community, what kind of fruit will we ever hope to see from this work? And so as we close, there are just a couple things that I want for us to see here. First of all, we want you to know that as you engage in wildly generous, radical, sacrificial generosity here, that you're making this honoring of other cultures' gospel impact a reality halfway around the world, allowing a couple like David and Melissa to invest a couple decades of their life to make this beautiful impact for eternity by bringing the Bible to a Bible-less group of people. And so you might never directly see the fruit of that. You probably won't, but know that your generosity is fueling that. Okay, and then secondly, be encouraged by their example, right? How can you engage somebody else who's spiritually curious in relationship? And so I'm going to ask you to just begin in prayer this week. Would you pray a prayer that would kind of echo or go along with a prayer just like this one? Let me close by giving this to you. God, help me have the eyes to see and the ears to hear the person you are inviting me to ask questions about, their world and their interests. Amen.